Hi, so I'll start with what happened 3 years back. My wife and I got engaged, and that was when my parents decided to cut all ties with me because they did not approve of our relationship at any cost. They knew that I loved her. We had been together for 2 years by then, and they had met a handful of times. But they had always been so unpleasant to her that I did not tell them about my plans of engagement or marriage. I figured that eventually they might come around and accept her. But when I told them that we were engaged, they were not happy about it at all. And they wanted me to call off the engagement. And when I refused, they cut me off. It was pretty disappointing because all my life I've always been a very obedient son, and I've always lived by their rules. And the one time that I wanted to do something for myself and for the love of my life, they were against it. And the reason that they were against us was also quite petty and disgusting. They did not like the fact that my father-in-law used to be a cleaner. It was quite classist on their part, and I never expected my parents to behave like this. But that's how it was. My wife's parents were never very rich. They were from the wrong side of the tracks, as one says. But even then, the two of them worked hard to make sure that she succeeded in life, and she has. And I'm very proud of her and her parents because it's quite inspiring. But I don't find it shameful. In fact, I find it very empowering. But when my wife shared her dad's story, that he happened to be a cleaner before he opened his own shop, my parents were not happy about that. And after that, they started being cold around her. And she didn't miss it either. She knew exactly what was going on, even though they never spelled it out for her, and neither did I. Of course, it hurt her, but she never said anything about it, and I kept trying to get my parents to like her, but they kept trying to get me to break up. Anyway, after we got engaged and they cut me off, my wife and her parents were also quite upset because they felt responsible for it, and they even offered to talk to my parents to fix this. But I was the one who asked them not to, because if my parents were going to come to their senses, it was going to have to be on their own. They shouldn't have to be told how to behave like a normal human being. At least that's what I thought. So for the past 3 years, we have had absolutely no contact, and it's been difficult for me to come to terms with it because as an only child, I've always been very close to my parents, but I've made my peace with it eventually. However, things started to change a couple of days back when I made a post on social media announcing our pregnancy. So, a few weeks back, my wife and I found out that we were pregnant, and after waiting for a while, we decided to announce it on social media. My parents are not on social media, so I didn't think that they would find out. But I guess somebody must have told them because they reached out to me after 3 years of no contact. I did not respond because it felt very abrupt. And my wife is not some baby producing machine that they'll only come around for the baby and nothing else. In my head, I had already made up my mind I was not going to allow them back into my life unless they apologized to me and my wife. But mostly my wife, for their past behavior. So I ignored them. But then 2 days back, they showed up at our house anyway. They had a bunch of gifts for all of us, so I guess they were trying to make things right. But the timing was not nice because I couldn't believe that they had waited until they had a grandchild on the way to apologize for everything, when in fact they should have done that much earlier. Anyway, when I opened the door, they expected me to let them in without asking any questions, and they expected me to be happy to see them. But instead, I made it very clear that I did appreciate their move to come over after they found out about the pregnancy, But I wanted them to apologize to my wife first, because otherwise I was not going to let them in. Whatever happened 3 years ago, it had been quite humiliating for her and her family because they had literally cut me off for just associating with them. And it was quite hurtful. I also knew for a fact that my wife would forgive them in a heartbeat if they asked for it. And in fact, I was pretty sure that even if they didn't formally apologize to her, she would let it slide. Because that's just the kind of person that she is. But I wanted them to apologize to her because I thought they owed it to her. So at the door, I told them that I was only going to let them in if they promised me that they were going to apologize to my wife for everything that had happened. And naturally, they didn't like that. They started protesting and saying I was being unreasonable, and that the fact that they had shown up for us was enough of an apology. They said I shouldn't be treating them like this, making them stand outside my house and making demands like this because it was ridiculous and made no sense. But for me, it made all the sense in the world, and I stood my ground. I didn't let them in. I kept arguing with them. After a while, we had been talking in circles for quite some time, and my wife, who had no idea who had come to the door, had started calling out for me to come back and didn't want her to come to the door and be upset by this argument between me and my parents. So I decided to tell my parents that they could either apologize or they could leave. Because I was done fighting. I just wanted to end it. And that's when they started saying that I was being extremely unfair and unreasonable. And that they couldn't believe that I was denying them the chance to have a relationship with their grandchild before it was even born. They were quite upset about it, and they were being pretty loud. And I didn't want my wife to hear any of that. Even though they were not talking about her, didn't make a difference because eventually I would have to explain everything to her. And whatever was happening was not very nice. Because once again they were refusing to apologize to her because they thought that they were somehow superior to all of us. And that was just so annoying that when they started whining, I slammed the door shut in their faces. And then I walked back into my living room and told my wife everything because naturally she had a lot of questions. After that, I did hear my parents driving away while I was talking to my wife, explaining things to her, and I was thankful that they were gone. But after speaking to my wife, her reaction was quite different from what I had expected. She told me that I should have just let them in, and if they wanted to apologize to her, they would have done so. But me keeping them outside and demanding that they apologize to me or else they wouldn't be allowed to come back into my life again was a bit too much. She didn't blame me for any of this. She told me that she was really proud of the fact that I had stood up for her and her family and been so supportive of them. But at the end of the day, she didn't want me to ruin my relationship with my parents permanently on her account, because then she never would have been able to forgive herself. Since she knows for a fact that I do miss my parents and that I definitely do want to repair my relationship with them, she told me that my behavior might have put them off indefinitely, and they might end up hating her even more because they might hold her responsible for my behavior. And it's pretty likely, and now I feel like I might have screwed things up even more, and I should have just let them in and let things run their course, and eventually they probably would have apologized anyway. But me trying to force it probably didn't help. And now I feel like an idiot. AITA for trying to force my parents to apologize to my wife when they had to come over to meet her after our pregnancy announcement. Update 1. Hey, thank you so much for all the comments and all the support. It really means a lot to me. So, It's been a couple of days since I posted, and I have made up my mind about what I want to do. I don't think that I want to reach out to my parents. I had been thinking about it because after my conversation with my wife, I thought that it would be the right thing to do. But now, I'm not so sure anymore. In a way, she did have a point that my behavior might have ended up backfiring on her because clearly my parents are the kind of people who will hold her responsible for everything that I do. It's sad, but I can't deny it because even back when we were dating and I had refused to break up with her because of our class differences, they had blamed her for it. So it's very likely that they will blame her for all of this once again. And they will think that she has manipulated me or brainwashed me into behaving like this or something. But the thing is, I don't care. At the end of the day, in the past 3 years, I have hardly had any contact with them. So I know for a fact that even if I miss them occasionally, I'm definitely going to be able to get by without them perfectly fine, just as I have been for the past 2 years. If they come to their senses and try to apologize, good for them. But if not, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference to my life because I already have a lot on my plate with my work and everything. And now with the baby on the way, I don't think I'm going to have the time to sit and think about all this drama. So, as it is, I don't think I have much of an incentive to invite them back into my life at the cost of being a pushover. And I know that my wife thinks that at some point I might hold her responsible for my poor relationship with my parents. But that's never going to happen. The only people that I'm going to hold responsible are my parents because after all, it is their own fault that I don't have a good relationship with them anymore. If they just respect my decision, if they had just been respectful towards my wife and her family, none of this would have been happening at all. But they chose to be disrespectful and mean, and that's not anybody else's fault apart from their own. And besides, if the tables had been turned, if my wife's parents had been the ones looking down on my parents, I don't think I would have been able to take that. I think I would have expected my wife to take a stand for me. I think I would have expected her to do the same things that I am doing right now, and even she knows that. And I trust her enough to know that she would have done the same thing, because we love each other enough to respect each other. And that's all that matters. So, right now, I don't think I'm doing the right thing by demanding an apology from my parents for everything that they have done in the past for her sake. Because I know that it's the right thing to do, and I have to stand my ground here. I've spoken to my wife about it as well, and I've explained everything about my thought process, and it was actually quite emotional because she told me that she definitely would have done the same thing, but at the end of the day, she did not want me to ruin my relationship with my parents because of her. And that's all that kept weighing on her conscience. It was actually pretty sweet how we were fighting for each other, and in the end she decided to tell me that since it was my relationship with my parents, she was not going to interfere and that she would support me in whatever I decided. So that was all that I needed to hear. And now I'm not going to reach back out to them until they apologize because that's all I have asked for. I think an apology is the bare minimum that they can offer us after everything that has gone wrong in the past. And to be honest, I think it's not just an apology for my wife, but also for her parents, because all of them had been stung by my parents' actions. Even for me, it had been quite embarrassing to explain their absence at my wedding to the rest of my family and all the guests. Naturally, I did not tell anybody the real story, but I did have to tell people that there had been some sort of falling out, which is why they were not there, without mentioning the specific details. So in the past, I think enough has happened for me to demand an apology from them before I let them back into my life. especially when I'm at the threshold of fatherhood. I know it sounds a bit dramatic, but that's how I feel. That I'm not going to let anybody walk all over me and get away with it now because I'm already a husband. And I'm going to be a father, and I have certain duties towards my family that I'm going to have to live up to. Update 2. Hey, so it's been 2 weeks since my last update, and today my parents made another attempt to contact me. They called me up, and yes, I've never blocked them, so that was possible. I know a lot of people even asked me about this after my original post, where I had mentioned that they had tried to reach out to me. So let me just clear it up. I've never blocked them, and I don't think I ever will, because at the end of the day, I am their only son. So, God forbid, in case anything untoward happens, I would like to be reachable, no matter what kind of terms we are on. But anyway, that's the reason I have never blocked them, and that's why they were able to call me. At first I ignored them because I didn't want to hear from them unless it was an apology, but then they kept trying to call me, and after about an hour I finally picked up because I was at work and I wanted them to stop bothering me. When I picked up, I waited for them to say something, and they immediately started lecturing me about how they had been trying to get through to me for about an hour and I had been ignoring them, how it was just not done. And they even played the only son card, saying that it might have been an emergency and I never would have been able to find out on time if I hadn't picked up. And 1 hour is enough time for something bad to happen. So I should not be behaving like this. It was pretty annoying, so I just told him to get to the point. And they started to tell me that they were planning on visiting me again this time. And we hoped that I would be a little more open-minded because they wanted to speak to my wife. I told them that if it was not an apology, then they shouldn't bother coming over at all because I was just not going to let them in. I have been very clear on that front, and they told me that they were not coming to apologize, but they just wanted to talk. And I shouldn't be so rigid about my feelings because if they're coming over to talk, it's obviously still them trying to set things right. And this is what I don't understand. If they can come all the way over to my house after everything that has happened to talk, then why can't they just commit to apologizing? Is it really that hard for them to accept that they were wrong and what they did was not acceptable? I even asked them, and they told me that it was not that simple. But I really don't see how, because for me, it is that simple. And I told him that if they were not going to apologize, they just shouldn't bother, period. I'm really done dealing with this kind of thing. And they tried to say something, but I cut them off and hung up on them because I had to get back to work. They tried calling me a couple of times more, but I just muted them and went on with my day. Later on, when I got back home, my wife was also there, and I had only been in for a couple of minutes when the doorbell started ringing. And this time, it was my wife who went to the door. And I already knew that it was going to be my parents, and I had warned her that it might be them. I had told her that I wanted to wait it out, and I did not want to open the door, but they just kept ringing the doorbell over and over again while we tried to ignore them. And after a while, my wife told me that she couldn't take it, and she wants to get this over with just as much as I do, so we should just open the door, let them in, and see what they have to say for themselves. I thought that after everything that had happened, that was as good an idea as any, so we went with that. Because by now, it was pretty clear they were not just going to leave this be, and they were going to keep trying to get in touch with us until it was guaranteed that they were going to be a part of their grandchild's life. However, that was one thing I was going to make sure didn't happen unless they apologized first. And I was going to make sure of that any way I could. But anyway, when my wife opened the door and let them in, they were very cordial with her, and they were surprisingly nice. When they saw me, They told me that it was shocking that I had changed my mind after the way they had been spoken to earlier that day, but I didn't say anything because I knew that they were trying to get a reaction out of me, and I was not going to give them the satisfaction because I knew their tactics. They had been the same way with me when I was younger, taunting me, getting passive aggressive whenever I did not do exactly what they wanted me to. So eventually I would just get frustrated and end up following their orders anyway, and that's how they kept me in line. But I'm a full grown man now, and this crap is not going to work on me anymore. So, with great difficulty, I kept my cool as we all took our place in the living room and they got to talking. First, they gave my wife a bunch of gifts, and then they started telling her that there was a lot to unpack here, so they were going to start by explaining their behavior in the past and hoped that she understood why they had been that way. They told us back in the past they had had their doubts about my wife because she did not come from the kind of family that they had wanted. They were obviously referring to the financial condition of her parents, because even now they are not as wealthy as mine. My parents are both financially well off. Both of them come from rich families, and it was a match set up by my grandparents. They got lucky that my parents got along so well, so they pushed each other to date. And they fell in love, and that was sad because they ended up getting married, and for them, this kind of thing was the norm. They expected me to marry somebody in my social circle or tax bracket. So my wife had been a surprise for them, and they always figured that I would leave her eventually, but that never happened, and so they started worrying that maybe my wife was with me for the money, because I was clearly from a financially stable family, and it would do her a world of good to marry into a family like that. That was why they never treated her well. They expected her to leave me alone, and when I decided to get engaged without speaking to them first, they thought that she had somehow brainwashed me into doing it, and they were very upset with her, but now they had changed their minds. At that point in time, I think both my wife and I thought that they were going to apologize, but instead they said that they expected us to understand where they were coming from and let bygones be bygones. Instead of an apology, they had basically explained things that we already knew, and then they tried to defend and justify it by saying that they were only acting out of concern for me because they did not want me to get my heart broken, and they wanted to protect their wealth, as if we didn't already know that that's what they were trying to do, and this was some new information that was being revealed to us that we should be grateful for. I was pretty annoyed because they were basically saying that my wife should just let it all go and forget about it, in spite of the way that we have been treated in the past by them, simply because they thought that she was a gold digger, and they wanted to protect me from that, even though she had established it quite early on that she wanted nothing from us financially. She had always been extremely independent, and yet my parents couldn't see that, even though I had tried to convince them of it back then, but they never believed me. So that was on them and not us. I was going to let them have it, but before I could say anything, my wife spoke up and told them that she already knew all of this, and they were not telling her anything. When she had opened the door and let them in, she had expected them to actually have an explanation that would make some sense. But this doesn't make any sense. And neither have they said that they are sorry, so she doesn't have anything to say to them. She pushed the gifts towards them and said that if this is all they have to say, then she would really appreciate it if they left, because clearly they think that she should just let it all go, and unfortunately she's not the kind of person who can do that, especially because it was not that she had been insulted by them, but also her parents. And even if for a second she's able to forgive them, she doesn't think that she will be able to forgive them for their behavior towards her parents. And she doesn't want to come off as a pushover. So she can't accept their non-apology. And she definitely cannot accept this explanation that they had thought she was a gold digger, even though she had never behaved that way. And she had never even given them a reason to believe the same. Even if they had believed that she was a gold digger, they had 3 years to think that over. But they didn't seem to care until they realized that they had a grandchild on the way. Only then did they come over to make amends. But even now, they're not willing to apologize to her for misunderstanding her and treating her badly. They just want to accept things as they are and forget about it. And I was very proud of her for standing up to her parents, because they looked really confused, since I am assuming that they thought they were just going to come up with some rubbish explanation and expect her to forget all about the past, but she didn't. My parents started looking at me, expecting me to say something, but I told them that they had been given a fair chance and they had blown it, so now they had to leave. I thought they were going to fight back, and my mom surely looked ready for it. But my dad just went very stony-faced. And then he grabbed my mom, and the two of them stormed out of our house, mumbling and grumbling about us. They didn't take the gifts with them, though, so we decided to keep them aside. But we haven't opened them, and neither are we going to do so until and unless my wife receives a proper apology from the two of them. Until then, I don't think that we have anything to say to them, and we don't want anything to do with them either. Update 3. So, hi everyone. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I welcomed our son into the world, and we are overjoyed to have him in our lives now. Past couple of months have been nothing short of absolutely blissful. And now that I'm a father, I don't even know how to explain that feeling. Anyway, I'm just really happy. I announced the birth of our baby boy on social media a couple of days back, and even though my parents and I have not spoken in over 6 months, they reached out to me to congratulate me. Last time that we had spoken was when I had posted my last update, so it's been quite a while since then. And I did not expect them to reach out to me, but I thanked them for congratulating me. And then they said that they really wanted to say that they were sorry to me and my wife, because in the past couple of months they had been thinking about their actions, and they had realized that it was all their fault, and now they don't want to let go of the chance of seeing their grandchild. So they really want us to forgive them and give them a chance to come over and see their grandson. I was not sure about it, so I discussed it with my wife, but she said it's fine if they come over and meet their grandson. The only thing that she wants them to do is genuinely apologize to her just one time before that. So I decided to call them and tell them what she had asked for, and they broke down into tears. When I handed over the phone to my wife, they ended up talking for quite some time, and by the end of it, both of them seemed to be in a better mood. So, what do you know? I guess all it took was the birth of my son and one phone call to solve these problems. Because from whatever I've heard from my wife on the phone, my parents seem to be genuinely apologetic, and they couldn't stop saying sorry to her, so I guess things are fine now. In a couple of days, they're going to be visiting. I just hope that things remain all good now, and I have a feeling they will, now that my son is here. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.